The Tuskegee Airmen. Courage knows no color. During World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen took a stand against the popular belief that African Americans were incompetent and soared above racial barriers as the first African American military aviators. They conquered fascism abroad and racism at home, becoming a pillar on which the civil rights movement would later stand. The early 1900s were a time when Jim Crow laws dictated a way of life for African Americans, calling for their separate yet equal treatment. The laws separated public facilities based on the color of one's skin. Even simple actions, such as shaking hands, could imply societal equality and were considered illicit. Often, blacks were considered lowly and were treated like animals by the white public. Sometimes I felt that defying gravity was easier than defying Jim Crow. Opportunities for African Americans were scarce in most facets of life. In the military, the notion of blacks and whites fighting side by side seemed absurd. Particularly in the Army Air Corps, machinery was deemed too complex for blacks to operate. African Americans who yearned to fly for their country were continually rejected due to their so-called mental and physical inferiority.
Because you have to understand, in 1925, there was a War College report written by our government that said that blacks were less, they were substandard, a substandard species, subhuman. They had no agility, they would panic under combat, so they were not qualified to take any kind of leadership positions.
At the time, blacks had been involved in the Army Air Corps, but were only allowed in non-combatant positions. Prior to the Airmen, there were only 2 recorded African American military aviators, neither of whom had taken a stand to fly in a deeply segregated America and instead flew for foreign countries. Meanwhile, global tensions were rising, with the Axis powers, led by Germany, gaining control over the Eastern Hemisphere. The United States, sensing the impending war, began to prepare troops. Knowing the importance of air power, the Civilian Pilot Training Program, or CPT, was established in 1938, but it trained only white male college students in aerial warfare. In 1940, the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, began a campaign to desegregate the U.S. Armed Forces. The NAACP, along with Yancey Williams, an African-American lawyer, sued the Army Air Corps for their discrimination against blacks. This led to Congress passing the Second Selective Service Act on September 16, 1940, requiring the armed forces to enlist African Americans.
Due to political pressure, the CPT was expanded to include black students. They were trained at Tuskegee Institute, Alabama, in a program that became known as the Tuskegee Experiment. In the experiment, the future airmen were held to standards higher than other trainees. They were expected to have higher test scores and complete further training than the white cadets, who had the luxury of error. Multiple black trainees were kicked out before even stepping foot in a plane.
My determination was no matter what, I was going to let nothing stand in the way of me and succeeding as a military aviator.
Their insistence to succeed gave them the strength to excel in their training, despite being set up for failure. They graduated with flying colors but were still considered inferior to whites, due to nothing but the color of their skin. December 7th, 1941, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. This declaration of war by Japan marked the entrance of America into World War II and sparked the Tuskegee Airmen's hope of proving themselves in action in the fight against Germany's fascism. Though America was in desperate need of pilots, they did not turn to the airmen for support. In March of 1941, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, an avid supporter of African American rights, took a highly publicized flight with Charles Anderson, a Tuskegee Airman. These boys are good pilots. To see a group of people working together for improvement of undesirable conditions is very heartening, she wrote. This praise from the First Lady pushed President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who hoped to gain African American support, to give the Tuskegee Airmen a chance to fly in overseas missions after many disagreements within Congress. They joined the 73% of U.S. armed forces serving overseas. While the white forces around them cycled every 16 months, the airmen were stationed for longer periods of time because they were thought to be expendable. While overseas, groups of airmen flew over North Africa, Italy, and the Mediterranean. In over 200 missions, they demolished 260 enemy aircraft, 1 German destroyer,
and numerous enemy installations. Unlike other pilots, who would break away from the bombers that they were escorting to seek combat and glory, the airmen employed a different tactic and stood alongside them throughout missions, an example of their unwavering resistance in World War II.
And it simply destroyed the myth of the incompetency of black airmen.
But despite their successes, 66 airmen lost their lives in battle, and 33 were taken as prisoners of war.
Not only was their flying making history in itself, the Tuskegee Airmen also stood against segregation through peaceful protest. The Freeman Field Mutiny resulted in the arrest of 52 black officers in 1945. They attempted to enter a commanding officers club designed to keep black pilots out, as none had that rank. They faced discharge. However, the airmen stood fast, for they knew the racism was immoral. In the face of despair, they didn't back down and didn't give up. As former Tuskegee Airman Roscoe Brown said, "They have a saying that excellence is the antidote to prejudice. So, once you show you can do it, some of the barriers will come down. Excellence will overcome obstacles. Excellence was our mantra." The airmen exemplified the idea that despite one's background, anything could be achieved, galvanizing fellow blacks and women to seek their place in the military as well. Their stand spurred President Harry Truman to establish Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948. It called for equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin, leading to the desegregation of all the armed forces. However, it would be 8 years until true integration. The airmen, celebrated as heroes in World War II, returned home only to face discrimination.
But before I could get in, a white officer threw up his hand. "You can't come in this door, boy. You got to go around the back." That was 10 minutes after I received my honorable discharge.
It was not until the end of the Korean War that every barrack, every troop, and every unit was made to include both blacks and whites. As the civil rights movement was progressing, the Tuskegee Airmen served as a gateway to momentous events such as the Loving vs. Virginia and Brown vs. the Board of Education court rulings. The airmen also fought for equality alongside renowned civil rights activists, many of whom recognized their stand as a precursor for their later endeavors.
So things didn't just change immediately. This was a long and continuous battle that went on. It just so happens that we are the ones that started the fight.
In 2007, they were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor by President Bush. President Obama noted that his career in public service was made possible by the path heroes like the Tuskegee Airmen trailblazed. They were also honored by Michelle Obama in an address given at Tuskegee University.
But as you all know, instead of being defined by the discrimination and the doubts of those around them, they became one of the most successful pursuit squadrons in our military. They went on to show the world that if black folks and white folks could fight together and fly together, then surely they could eat at a lunch counter together. Surely their kids could go to school together.
Today, the military is a well-oiled machine made of people from all backgrounds. There are about 228,000 blacks in the Army, compared to fewer than 4,000 in the 1940s. Blacks hold more leadership positions in the military than in any other field. However, in a society where movements like Black Lives Matter are necessary, the racial divide has not been fully bridged. Racism, though lessened, has not disappeared. Yet without the Tuskegee Airmen stand, America might not have reached its present awareness of equality. Their stand gave the public the voice they needed to speak up against racism.
The true passion of the Tuskegee Airmen lived in their resolve. Their own home waged a war against them, yet through their determination and fortitude, they took a stand and soared beyond all criticism. While there are many stories about courageous and death-defying military groups, it would be hard to find one that was faced with the same kind of hardships that the Tuskegee Airmen did. In their steadfast actions in their journey to America's World War II victory, they truly proved to everyone who doubted them that courage knows no color.